Since it was freed in January 1945, Auschwitz has become a name that reminds us of some of the worst things that ever happened. It's where terrible crimes against humanity took place during World War II. Many people somehow survived this terrible place and told the world about the awful things that happened there. In this video, we're going to learn about the harsh punishments and ways people were treated in Auschwitz, the most notorious camp of World War II. Auschwitz was the biggest camp set up by Nazi Germany. It was a massive area with 2 work camps and 1 camp for killing people. It was split into 3 parts: Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, also called Birkenau, and Auschwitz III, known as Monowitz. Over 1 million people lost their lives here, and most of them were Jewish. The horror started even before entering the camp. There was a sign over the entrance that said, "Arbeit macht frei," or "Work makes you free."
During his time as a doctor in Auschwitz, he would liquidate and murder innocent prisoners.
This was a cruel joke because work there was another way to destroy people. The Nazis used it as a way to kill people slowly while making them work. Those who were healthy enough to avoid being killed right away at Birkenau were prepared for a tough life of work. Their heads were shaved and they got a number tattooed on their left arm. This was the first step in taking away their identities, which was just one of many horrible things done to people in Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, the men had to wear tattered pants and striped jackets, and the women were given work dresses. They all got shoes, but these shoes were often the wrong size, causing painful foot problems and cuts. The prisoners didn't get any extra clothes and had to sleep in the same worn-out clothes they worked in all day. This made it easy for diseases and infections to spread, and sadly, many people died because of this. Life in the camp was extremely hard, and sometimes the prisoners made mistakes or tried to make their difficult lives a little better.
Mengele would leave Auschwitz in January 1945, in time before the Red Army liberated the camp.
But even small things like this were met with harsh punishment. The rules were strict, and the people in charge of the camp were very cruel. This made every day a struggle for the people who were trapped there, trying to survive in such a harsh place. In Auschwitz, the rules for forced work were written down by the people who ran the camp and the SS, a group in Nazi Germany. The rules were very strict. The most common rule breaking was when prisoners tried to get extra food or didn't work as hard as the camp leaders wanted. Even small things like smoking, resting at the wrong time, or wearing clothes not allowed by the Nazis could get someone in trouble. Sadly, even if a prisoner tried to escape this terrible place by attempting suicide, they were punished. If someone tried to escape and survived, the punishment was really harsh. There was a set of rules called the Penal and Disciplinary Code that said what the punishment should be for each rule that was broken. But often the punishments didn't follow these rules and were decided by the camp leaders and guards. They could be very cruel, and sometimes the same mistake would lead to different punishments for different people. It showed how unfair and harsh life in the camp was. In Auschwitz, one of the worst places was Block 11. It was like a jail inside the already terrible camp. People who broke the rules were sent there, but also those who were just waiting for the Nazis to harm them in different ways. This was the place where they first used Zyklon B gas for executions. Block 11 also had rooms where prisoners were tortured in many painful ways. Some were locked up without any food. There were also really small cells called standing cells, where prisoners could only stand up. These cells were tiny, just enough for one person, with only a small hole to breathe through. People could be stuck in these cells for up to 20 days, and they still had to work during the day without proper rest. The guards and officials at Auschwitz could be very cruel. One of the worst was a Gestapo officer named Wilhelm Bulger, also known as the Auschwitz Tiger. He invented something called the Bulger hammock. It was an iron bar hanging from chains. Prisoners without any clothes were tied up in a painful way on this hammock. They were swung around and beaten while Bulger asked them questions. This caused so much pain and dizziness that they would faint and sometimes even die. The floors of Block 11 had signs of these terrible acts, like lost teeth and skin from the victims. It's a really sad and scary part of history that shows how awful people were treated in Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, the air was filled with a terrible mix of smells from cleaning chemicals and blood. This created a really hard-to-bear atmosphere for the prisoners. Among the people who were known for being especially cruel were Maria Mandel and her assistant, Irma Gries. They were in charge of the women in the camp. Mandel and Gries were known for punishing the women in awful ways. They would often use physical abuse, whipping, and sometimes even sicking dogs on the prisoners. This harsh treatment was what the women had to face for even the smallest mistakes or not doing their daily tasks perfectly. It was a time of constant fear and suffering for the female prisoners in Auschwitz, showing the extreme cruelty they faced every day. Remembering these stories is important to understand how bad things were and to make sure we treat everyone with kindness and humanity. As we talked about before, Auschwitz had 3 different camps, and the second one, called Auschwitz-Birkenau, was the place where a lot of the killing happened. It was set up in 1941, a bit away from the main camp, to speed up the terrible process the Germans were doing during the war. As the war went on, they wanted to get rid of more prisoners, and there wasn't enough work to make them all die from being overworked. In Auschwitz-Birkenau, there were 4 big buildings with gas chambers where people were killed. Each one could hold up to 2,500 people at a time. One of the cruelest things the Nazis did was they made other Jewish prisoners, called the Sonderkommandos, do really sad and hard work. These prisoners had to look for gold teeth and other valuable things in the bodies of people who had just been killed. They also had to cut and collect the hair of women who had been murdered and lead other people, sometimes even their own relatives, to the gas chambers. For a long time, people thought the Sonderkommandos were helping the Nazis, but the truth is, they had no choice. They were forced to do these terrible jobs, and if they didn't collect enough valuable things, they were punished very harshly, sometimes even thrown into the fire themselves. It's a really sad part of the story of Auschwitz, and shows just how terrible things were there. It's important to remember these stories so we can understand the full horror of what happened and make sure it never happens again. Going back to the story of Auschwitz, there was a place called Block 10. This was where a man named Josef Mengele did a lot of his experiments on people. Mengele was really focused on studying twins, people with different colored eyes, a condition called heterochromia, small people, dwarfs, and anyone with unusual genetic traits. Mengele's experiments were cruel and caused a lot of pain and suffering to the people he used for them. He didn't care about their well-being at all, and was just interested in his research, no matter how much it hurt them. This part of Auschwitz's history is really sad and shows just how horrible things were for the people there. Remembering stories like these is important to understand the terrible things that happened and to learn from the past. The doctor in Auschwitz, Josef Mengele, did experiments on prisoners without caring about their health. Some of his experiments included injecting chemicals into people's eyes to change their eye color. In other cases, he would remove their eyeballs to look at them, which often led to the person's death. One of the most horrible things he did was try to stitch 2 young kids together to make them like conjoined twins. Sadly, both children died because of this. Auschwitz was like a factory for causing death. There were many ways a prisoner could die there. They could be worked until they couldn't survive anymore, tortured in Block 11, have their body parts taken in Block 10, or be killed with gas in Birkenau. In total, over 1.3 million people were brought to Auschwitz, and about 1.1 million of them died there. The punishments and treatments in Auschwitz are one of the darkest parts of human history. It's important to talk about these things so we can remember how terrible they were and make sure nothing like it ever happens again. In conclusion, Auschwitz stands as a chilling reminder of the unimaginable suffering inflicted on innocent people during World War II. The harsh punishments, dehumanizing conditions, and inhumane experiments endured by prisoners are part of a dark chapter in history that we must never forget. Remembering these stories serves as a solemn promise to ensure that such horrors are never repeated in our world. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us keep bringing you more great content. Thanks for being part of our community.